Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets here on another episode of Countdown to the Cup, where we're taking a look at trainer Chad Brown and his previous successes in the Breeders' Cup, as well as his 2024 contenders, which is a significant list of 10 potential runners. Now, before we get to Brown and his contenders this year, make sure to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. Subscribing is entirely free of cost and is just a great way to make sure that you know when our latest content is dropping. And we have a lot coming out every single day for you, whether it is these trainer specific videos, whether it is top 5 videos for contenders for the different races, whether it's the video we did on the pre-entries looking at all 14 fields for the Breeders' Cup. Next week, we have classic contenders for each of the major horses running, as well as a capping the card going over the 5 races on Breeders' Cup Juvenile Friday, and then a separate capping the card going over the 9 Breeders' Cup Classic races taking place on Classic Saturday. So like I said, make sure to subscribe to NYRA Bets. While you're at it, make sure to download the NYRA Bets app. You can bet anywhere, any track, anytime. And we have a lot of great promotions, some sign-up promotions. If you've never played with NYRA Bets before, we'd love to have you. Make sure to download and check it all out. All right. Well, listen, like I said, this episode is focused on trainer Chad Brown and the successes that he has had at the Breeders' Cup, and then looking at his contenders for 2024, which, as I said, is a pretty significant list. And we'll start by just looking at his previous success at the Breeders' Cup. And you'll see that he has a really strong record at the Breeders' Cup, considering and comparing to some of the other top trainers. Over his career, he's had 138 starters, 18 victories. That's significant, a 13% win rate. If it wasn't for someone like Brad Cox, we'd really be talking about Chad Brown as being probably the most successful Breeders' Cup trainer right now in terms of win percentage. Because if you look at people like Todd Pletcher, who's at about 8.5%, Steve Asmussen at 10%, Bill Mott just barely eking over 10% the last couple of years, with Cody's Wish and Elite Power really helping those percentages out. You know, Bob Baffert's at about 12% over his career. But by and large, Brown has had as sustained a run of success in these Breeders' Cup races as you could imagine. Part of it is because of how many outstanding turf horses he has. But listen, he's done well in the dirt as well. We've seen him with Good Magic and others. So 33% of his runners hitting the board, 46 out of 138, has a lot of success. Going out to Del Mar, he's brought large contingents out to Del Mar the last 2 times out, in 2017 and in 2021. 2 for 24, not the greatest, but has won a couple of races out there. 8 for 24 in the money, which is right in his career 33% rate. So he can ship out there. It's not a problem. And his horses have fired out Del Mar before, so can do it. He will occasionally send horses out for non-Breeders' Cup events, although it is rare, but you'll occasionally see Brown sending a runner or two out west to either Santa Anita or Del Mar for a particularly big race. Sometimes you'll see kind of late in their 3-year-old year, he'll send them out for some of those late races at Santa Anita. But listen, let's talk about the horses that he's got in this year's group, and it is a sizable list. Easily the biggest list of contenders and runners out of all the major American trainers, certainly more than Cox or Pletcher or Baffert or Asmussen or Mott. So very sizable here. 10 overall potential runners. We got to start with Sierra Leone, though, right? This is a horse that I think has caused a lot of people a lot of headaches, because there's no denying the talent of Sierra Leone. $2.3 million son of Gunrunner. And he has never missed the board in 8 career starts, but he only has 3 wins in debut, in the Risen Star, and in the Bluegrass. Has not won since that Bluegrass Stakes. Second by a nose in the Kentucky Derby, third by a length and a half in the Belmont, second by a length in the Jim Dandy, and third by a length and 3/4 in the Travers. Now, we're going to take a look at that Travers. And I think it's an interesting race because he's going to be coming from the back. He's a number 2 at this point. And he's kind of made up some ground already. He's sitting a little bit closer than he normally does. But of course, as always, goes really wide, coming around for home, giving up a lot of ground. Fierceness already has the jump on the field at this point, is out ahead. And it's Torpedo Anna that is actually the one making up the more dynamic ground here late. And Sierra Leone's coming with his run, as he always does. and he's going to make up his ground, and he's going to make a charge, and he's going to make it close, but it's ultimately Torpedo Anna and Fierceness who finished 1-2, Sierra Leone just behind for third. Now, here's the thing. You'd expect a horse like Sierra Leone to like the distance and pace setup for the Breeders' Cup Classic. Breeders' Cup Classic tends to feature a strong pace, and they're going 1.25 miles. Strong pace and 1.25 miles should be a good winning recipe for Sierra Leone. But, and as I always joke, there's always a but. It's Del Mar. And Del Mar, you just don't see horses closing from the back going 2 turns. Now, that said, there's again another but, and there's a caveat. Over the last 2 times the Del Mar has hosted the Breeders' Cup in 2017 and 2021, of the 10 dirt route races, 4 of the 10 winners of those dirt route races have come from more than 3 lengths back at the half-mile mark. You've seen it happen. You saw it happen with a horse like Marche Lorraine in the Distaff a few years ago in 2021 when it was at Del Mar, coming from well back that day. But those races featured very strong paces. Will Sierra Leone get the pace to run into? Now, there's also a theory that is out there that Sierra Leone simply did not like Saratoga. And it's interesting because you could argue, well, Matthew, he ran his, best speed figures in Saratoga. Ran a 109 in the Travers, ran a 102 in the Jim Dandy, ran a 99 in the Belmont. And he's never gotten slower, I should mention. It's a pretty remarkable trend. He's never gotten slower in his career from a Beyer speed figure perspective. 71, 91, 95, 98, 99, 99, 102, 109. I talk about progression. Flavian Pratt's going to be his rider. He's been favored the last 3 times out. He hasn't won any of them. The last 2 times he was favored before that, he won both in the Risen Star and in the Bluegrass. So he's a very talented horse. He's already won $2.3 million. He's won his sales price back. And it's going to be interesting, though, because the theory is he didn't like the dirt up at Saratoga and didn't necessarily like the kickback. He wouldn't be the first horse not to like it up at Saratoga. There are some horses that love it up there. We talked about that with Fierceness. Fierceness has arguably run his best races in his career at Saratoga. Sierra Leone has run some very good races, but may not like it quite as much. There is something to be said for that, only insofar as Brown has now moved him down and he is training him at Belmont. Now, Brown's been training other runners up at Saratoga still. This one down at Belmont. And when you see him down at Belmont, he's been training very, very well down there leading up for this race. He's an interesting horse. I feel like he's one everybody's probably going to fade a little bit in this spot. I think you're actually going to get a decent price on Sierra Leone. 3-year-old going against Olders, deep closing running style on a track that doesn't favor that. A lot of other contenders in the mix, but there could be some pace in this race. Arthur's Ride, City of Troy, Fierceness, Highland Falls, Dermasotogake, Forever Young. All these horses want to be forward for sure. And Sierra Leone's got a powerful closing kick, and there's no 2 ways about it. The question is whether or not he's going to get the right setup and whether or not he takes to the track and surface out at Del Mar and whether the surface kind of takes to his running style. Now let's talk about a horse that is in the distaff that is actually going to be one of your favorites in all likelihood. Now that the Idiomatic has scratched, it's going to be Torpedo Anna as your favorite, but your likely second choice is going to be Raging Sea, who has had a really interesting year in that she's won a Grade 1, and she's won 3 of her 4 starts this year, and is a really nice horse. Lost in the Ogden Phipps, but won the Double Dog Dare, won the Chuvy, won the Personal Ensign, won the Beldame. That would be a heck of a season for just about any horse. And yet there's a lot of questions about her because of how she won the Beldame last time out. And that was as a 1-9 favorite and barely being able to win that race. And here she is in kind of coming up on the outside as she always does. She has kind of an off-the-pace running style. And Batacuda, who's in this race as well, you think is going to fade at this point. The Raging Sea is just going to blow on by, and it just doesn't happen. Batacuda really fights back on the inside rail. Now, maybe the inside was a little bit better that day. Still, there's no reason Raging Sea should have had that close of a victory as a 1-9 favorite against that field. So I think there's some red flags there with Raging Sea, might need the pace setup. The victory she got in the personal ensign, which is absolutely kind of a highlight of her career to this point, and her only grade 1 victory, really came because Idiomatic and Randomized dueled themselves into submission. And while Idiomatic won the battle that day, she ultimately lost the war. Does have Flavian Pratt up on the mount. That's always dangerous. Sired by Curlin, should absolutely love the distance and could kind of bounce back to that personal ensign form. And, she's run some big races before in the double dog dare. The question is she good enough to beat Torpedo Anna, especially now that Torpedo Anna is probably lone speed in this race with Idiomatic scratching. So when that horse scratches, suddenly now that really opens things up quite a bit. And the only other horse that I think you could potentially make a case for in that distaff is the Japanese horse Awesome Result, who's a perfect 7 for 7. But I'm not as enthused about Raging Sea as I am some of his other horses. Now, speaking of a horse that everybody loves, and that's Carl Spackler. Everybody loves Carl Spackler. Why? Well, partially because he's got a really cute face, partially because of his name, and partially because people just like Caddyshack. And I mean, I love Caddyshack. So I got that going for me, which is nice. But we all love some Carl Spackler, and he also does have a very adorable face. But he's also a really good horse. Don't let the people who just focus on how cute a nose is fool you on this one. This is a really nice horse, and he's a horse that it's interesting. He had a lot of talent. I felt like last year, and he won that Hall of Fame. He won the Saranac. He comes back as a 4-year-old. Wins the opening verses at Churchill during that, I want to say it was during Derby, actually, the Thursday of the Kentucky Derby. Then goes to the poker and loses. Is wide around both turns, for sure, and maybe a little further back than he would prefer. Then has ripped off 3 outstanding races. Wins the Kelso, wins the 4-Star Dave, wins the Turf Mile. And so he's got a grade 3 and 2 grade 1 victories to his name. He's now earned over $1.5 million. The son of Lupe de Vega and trained by Chad Brown, obviously, ridden by Tyler Gaffleone. He's gone off as a favorite 2 of the last 3 times and cashed in both of those times. He's a really nice horse. The question is, I think he's had the perfect trip the last 3 times out. He's basically either sat on the lead or stalked the pace very intently in that Turf Mile, 4-Star Dave, and in the Kelso. And we'll watch the 4-Star Dave where he just is up on the lead, or I'm sorry, in the Turf Classic where he's just up on the lead and just pulls away. And, eventually Cherie DeVoe's horse, More Than Looks, starts making up ground. But Carl Spackler and that Big White Blaze just starts pulling away from the field here in the middle of the stretch. And it's not until a little bit later that now here comes More Than Looks trying to make a move and getting up closer. But by that point, the race was already won and Carl Spackler had it in hand. Really won the 4-Star Dave impressively again over More Than Looks by over 3.5 lengths that day up at Saratoga. And, is a really good horse. But you could argue has had the perfect trip every single time. And as I've mentioned before on some of these videos, we have not seen a gate-to-wire winner in a Breeders' Cup turf route race at Del Mar yet. 0 for 10 in terms of success wiring the field going 2 turns on the turf at Del Mar. Carl Spackler is going to be up on the lead. Certainly going to be contending for it. Whether he gets it or not, we'll see. But this is as deep of a field in terms of this mile that you're going to see. And it's going to be led by Donica O'Brien's Porta Fortuna coming over from overseas. And all this horse has done is win 3 consecutive Group 1s overseas at a mile, the Coronation Stakes during Royal Ascot, the Falmouth Stakes at Newmarket, and then winning the Matron at Leopardstown. This horse is a monster, an absolute monster. So that's going to be a tough one to contend with just by itself. Okay. Then you add in More Than Looks, who I think will actually get more of a pace setup here and actually could be the more dangerous of the 2 horses coming out of the Turf Mile. You got Aidan O'Brien's Mountain Bear, who I feel is a really good horse. You got Remulet. You got a slew of horses here that are going to be really tough to contend with. Even a horse like Diego Velasquez, who I think is an excellent horse in his own right, who's a 3-year-old stepping up, facing some tough competition here after winning a Group 2 and a Group 3 last time out. So, going to be a tough race. Going to be a very tough race. We love Carl Spackler, but it's the tough spot. Now, Chad is also running 2 of his fillies in this race, and he's kind of made a little bit known that he's not necessarily thrilled about the distance and the configuration of the filly and mare turf being 3 turns when there are no 3-turn races for fillies and mares, kind of prepping for this. And so, I understandable that Chad has made those comments, but I will also say it's not like we didn't know it was going to be a 3-turn race. When we knew it was at Del Mar, we knew this configuration was going to be the case. So it is interesting to see no Chad Brown horses in the turf or the filly and mare turf. They're all going to be here in the mile. And we can watch that first lady that features both Chili Flag and Gina Romantica. And, these two are, again, interesting horses in that I really like talking about Chili Flag a lot. But Gina Romantica, I mean, how can you hold anything against her? She's such a cool horse that just kind of keeps getting better and better. But you see them kind of turning for home and, putting on the afterburners here in terms of Gina Romantica spurting clear of the field and then Chili Flag kind of giving chase late to get up for second and to kind of separate herself from everyone else. But those two are really good. Gina Romantica is a horse that always takes a couple of races to get going on the season. Usually is a slow starter on the year, needs a race or 2 under her belt, usually starts firing her best 3rd, 4th, 5th start out. What did we see again this year? 4th, I think 7th in the Jenny Wiley, then 5th in the Just a Game, then almost won the Diana, but White Beam won it in gate to wire fashion, but lost by less than a length. 2nd by a neck in the Boston Spa to Butte Cachet, who was able to walk the dog up front that day. And then finally, you look at the First Lady coming through and winning that race impressively. She's in her best form right now. No 2 ways about it. It will be interesting to see who rides her, whether it's Jose Ortiz, whether it's Tyler Gaffleone, whether it's Flavian Pratt. So going to be interesting. But she's a legitimate horse who is battle tested as they come. Finished 4th by only a length in this race last year to Master of the Seas and Mauge and Casa Creed. So she can hold her own against the boys in this spot. No 2 ways about that. Now, Chili Flag is an interesting horse. I said I like to talk about Chili Flag. I love talking about Chili Flag because Chili Flag's a weird horse for Chad. This is a horse that was a stakes horse over in Europe. Not a stakes winner, but ran in some stakes races over in France. Comes over to North America. And Chad runs this horse against Optional Claiming and Allowance Company basically for the first year the horse is over here. And that's an unusual move. Typically, when Chad gets a horse from overseas, yes, they might get a tune-up and against Allowance or Optional Claiming Company, but before you can blink, they're up against Stakes Company and Graded Stakes Company. But really took his time with Chili Flag. And the horse ran with Lasix for a while. And it really wasn't until November of 2023 that the horse finally gets its first shot against Stakes Company, and it was even a listed stakes race at Aqueduct, gets the win, then immediately gets stepped up to the Pegasus Filly and Mare Turf Invitational, finishes 6th that day behind a really tough group, including Dadia, but then rips off quite a run with Irad Ortiz Jr. aboard. Wins the Honey Fox, wins the Distaff Turf Mile, and wins the Just a Game in 3 consecutive races, including beating White Beam, who we mentioned earlier. Now, White Beam comes back to win the Diana. Chili Beam does not run quite as well, or Chili Flag, I should say, does not run quite as well. Ultimately, she's a miler. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And at a mile, she's pretty damn tough. Now, she is more of a closer, and she's adopted more of a deep closing running style. That has not been a problem at Del Mar, going 2 turns on the turf. We've seen those deep closers have success there. So certainly, Gina Romantica, a tough customer in this particular spot. Now let's talk about another one of Chad's many horses that he's got in this race, and that is Ways and Means. And this is a horse that I think is pretty cool. And we've seen her obviously on the Kentucky Oaks Trail this year. And she has been putting on quite a show, though, since cutting back to 1 turn. And she, was very impressive in debut, going back to last year as a 2-year-old, loses to Bright Work in the spin away, then goes to the bench for quite a while, comes back and runs 2nd to Power Squeeze. Very good horse, obviously, in the Gulfstream Park Oaks, runs 4th in the Kentucky Oaks. And after that, Chad decides, something, we're going to a mile or less, and blows out the competition going a mile against Allowance Company, then goes up and faces a nice group of horses. My Main Squeeze and Emery in the test, blows them away, and then goes and face older competition in the Gallant Bloom last time out and absolutely makes mincemeat of that group and wins by 4 lengths. And you can see it was a sloppy sealed track that day, and she's right there stalking the pace, turning for home, and takes over the lead from Nick Style, who was a pretty nice horse who won impressively in the previous race. And Ways and Means just kind of eventually puts on the afterburners and just starts pulling away. And you can tell not really even being asked for her best at this point. She's going to be a handful to contend with in this race. I think she's a really dangerous horse in this spot because if you look, she can track the pace. She doesn't need to be up on the lead. She can sit second or third. She can stalk. Vava is obviously going to be a major contender in this race, and Society is going to be a major contender in this race. Society could try to get away up on the front end, and it's going to be interesting to see how much Ways and Means lets her get away, because I think she's going to be kind of glued to Society's back flank for a lot of this race. A horse like Bob Baffert's horse Pleasant, who's entered, has some good early speed as well, so we'll see. A horse that I think is an X factor in this race is a horse like Scylla, who's a little bit interesting. But Ways and Means certainly going to be among your top choices in this year's filly and mare sprint. Now let's go to the Dirt Mile, which is the final race on the card for the Breeders' Cup. And we have Domestic Product. And kind of the same song, second verse, with regards to Ways and Means and Domestic Product. Domestic Product, we remember from the Kentucky Derby Trail. And this is a horse that won the Tampa Bay Derby and, did it pretty, in pretty dramatic fashion. Coming from off the pace behind a glacial pace. If you remember, that was a non-wagering event. We try to forget those, but it was a non-wagering event because there was a tote communication problem down at Tampa Bay Downs. And they went 116-1 to the 3/4. I mean, they went glacial in this race. And yet Domestic Product was able to stalk sit pretty far, mid-pack and come from off the pace to win that race and get up by a neck. Now, then ran in the Kentucky Derby and finished pretty far back in that race. Didn't have the best start and was kind of over before it started in a lot of ways for him. Then goes and runs in the Pegasus at Monmouth, a bizarrely run race where they stacked up 5 wide across both turns, and he was 4 wide the whole way. Finishes second ultimately to Tuscan Sky, but then cuts back to a mile in the Dwyer and cuts back to one-turn racing and absolutely blows out the field in the Dwyer and goes and wins that by 7.5 lengths over Hades and Bilal and a couple of others. And then steps up and wins the 8 Challenge Jerkins. And that's the race I'm going to show you here, because I thought that Prince of Monaco, who, oh, by the way, was just retired and will stand for $30,000, I believe, for Spendthrift next year, but he has been retired due to a bone bruise. But Domestic Product's still running, although he's going to be retired too. But this was one in the 8 Challenge Jerkins that, again, he's there in the red and white silks on the outside. And I think at this point, and when I'm watching this, Prince of Monaco takes over the lead. And I think Baffert has this race. And Domestic Product keeps running. Bookham Dano dives down to the inside. This was a loaded race with these top 3. And those top 3 really separate themselves from the field. Prince of Monaco and Domestic Product battling down to the wire. And Domestic Product ultimately putting his head in front and getting the win there. A defining Grade 1 win for that horse. And really impressive effort. Ran a 106 Beyer speed figure. The question is whether or not he's going to like the 2-turn configuration of the mile. That said, he should get the pace to run into. He's a horse that can sit from off. And you would imagine that in this race, a horse like Seize the Gray, a horse like National Treasure, and a horse like Saudi Crown are all going to want to contest for the early lead. That could set up very nicely for a horse like Domestic Product. And again, a 3-year-old stepping up, facing older competition for the first time. But he's got the foundation. He's won going a mile and a 16th around 2 turns. So you can handle the 2-turn configuration. And he even broke his maiden going a mile and an 1/8 at Belmont at the Big A. So he can handle 2 turns. The question is what pace setup he gets. I think is an advantageous one. Chad Brown could have a nice weekend here with some of those horses. Now, let's shift to Juvenile Friday, because Chad Brown's got some very impressive horses these 2 days. And we'll start with our boy Chancer McPatrick, who is a deep closer and is a thrilling horse to watch. A little bit of a nerve-wracking horse to watch potentially, but a thrilling horse to watch. And he's a perfect 3 for 3. He's got 2 Grade 1 wins, but he likes to come from off the pace. And I think people made a big deal about he had a little bit of trouble in the break in the hopeful. But by and large, he really has done a nice job being able to break well in his races. He just doesn't have elite early speed. I think an outside post position is actually advantageous for him because he doesn't seem to like kickback. If you watch the head on from his debut race, he really did not like facing kickback at all that day. So it's interesting. I think the outside post in the Champagne helped. He is going to be going 2 turns for the first time. Sired by McKinsey, should appreciate going 2 turns. That shouldn't be an issue, but this will be a new distance and a new configuration for him. I want to show you this Champagne, though, because you just don't see many horses make moves like this. And we're going to pick it up on the backstretch. They're just going into the turn. He's the 10, sitting second to last on the far right of your screen. And look at this move he starts to make. He's going what you don't see 2-year-olds make this type of move against grade 1 competition. He's just blowing by horses at this point. And this will be the key in the juvenile. He needs to do his dirty work around the turn so that when he turns for home, this is exactly what he has for him. He's got to get past 2 horses, basically, turning for home. And he gets past JJ Zozo, and then he tracks down and passes Tip Top Thomas, who I think is a real nice horse for Todd Pletcher. But this is a really impressive horse who just hits his best stride late. And I was walking out of the paddock after this race with Acacia Clement, and Acacia just looked at me and goes, man, that's some horse. And what a move. And we were both really impressed by how good Chancer McPatrick is. Very, very impressive horse. We'll see. And that juvenile's stacked because you got East Avenue, you got Ferocious, you got Gaming, you got, some other Baffert horses in there like Citizen Bull. That's a loaded juvenile field. Zulu Kingdom in the Juvenile Turf, not quite as high on this one. Won the With Anticipation, won the Pilgrim last time out. Maybe should have lost both of those races, actually. Is a good horse, but took a little bit of a step back on the speed figures. We'll see. I'm not quite as high on this horse as some of the others. The final horse I wanted to emphasize was Virgin Colada, because Virgin Colada had a really bizarre last race, finishing second in the Miss Grillo. And this is one where the top 3 horses take themselves out by blowing the turn. And we'll just watch that one more time. So they're going into the far turn, or they're coming out of the far turn, I should say, about to turn for home. And the top 3 horses just wipe themselves out because the 5 can't handle the turn. And they all get pushed out. And as a result, Scythian for Bill Mott just inherits the lead and is able to kind of pull away. And what you see is Virgin Colada is the only horse that's really making up a ton of ground now, starts to really kick it into high gear and is starting to track down Scythian as they're getting closer and closer to the wire, gets up for second, and is able to get, a placement in this race. That was just a bizarre race. And I wonder if this horse gets maybe a little bit more of a pace setup, maybe a little bit more of a normal running of the race, could be a little bit more of a price, and could be an interesting horse for Chad Brown. Virgin Colada is an interesting one in my eyes for that race, only because of how bizarre that Miss Grillo was in that last time out. But you can see Chad's horses are running well. I mean, all of these horses, they're either winning second or third last time out. None of them, it's not like some of these horses won a win and you're in back in, June. And now they're kind of, not in their best form coming into this. They're running well and they really seem to be ready. And I think Chad's got a real serious chance to have a big weekend this weekend with some of his runners in the Breeders' Cup. Well, listen, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Countdown to the Cup, highlighting Chad Brown's success and his previous runners, or his runners for this year and his contenders. Make sure to press that like and subscribe button to check out all of our NYRA Bets YouTube content. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.